morning.
Good morning.
I didn't ask somebody to read scripture before service, so Noah, do you want to read scripture for me?
Which one is it?
I got it up here. It's a short passage from Mark 11. Thanks, brother.
See, I got dyslexia.
Well,
So if I don't read it a few times before, I kind of stumble along.
you'll get it. You'll get it.
That's true, I do have
Oh, could you stand for the reading of God's word?
Yes.
This is Mark chapter 11, verses 12 through 21. Mark chapter 11.
Everybody got it?
Amen.
The next day, as they were leaving Bethany, Jesus was hungry. Seeing in the distance a fig tree and leaf, he went to find out if it had any fruit. When he reached it, he found nothing but leaves, because it was not the season for figs. Then he said to the tree, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And his disciples heard him say it. On reaching Jerusalem, Jesus entered the temple courts and began driving out those who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves, and would not allow anyone to carry merchandise through the temple courts. And as he taught them, he said, "Is it not written, 'My house will be called a house of prayer for all nations'? But you have made it a den of thieves, a den of robbers." The chief priests and the teachers of the law heard this and began looking for a way to kill him, for they feared him, because the whole crowd was amazed at his teaching. When evening came, Jesus and his disciples went out of the city. In the morning, as they went along, they saw the fig tree withered from the roots. Peter remembered and said to Jesus, "Rabbi, look, the fig tree you cursed has withered." This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Very much. Oh, you got mine.
We can trade that. All right, you can be seated. Thank you. Strange passage, right? Like, what's Jesus got against this poor fig tree? Like, this poor fig tree's just sitting there. It's not even the fig tree season. And Jesus is like, "You're never going to bear fruit again." Why is he cursing this random fig tree? It's a mystery for us in this passage what Jesus has against this fig tree. But I hope to elucidate what the answer to that question is. But I actually want to see if we can elucidate it before I just tell you what it's supposed to mean. I want to see if you guys can figure this out. Some of the things that we've been talking about throughout Mark can help us. So for example, do you remember I talked about a Markan sandwich, where it's like story A and then story B and then comes back to story A? It's a pretty normal rhetorical device, and we saw that a long time ago, like last semester in Mark chapter 3, where you had Jesus' family saying, "Hey, this guy's out of his mind," and then you had inside the house, the scribes were saying he's possessed by demons, and then the family's calling for him again. You're supposed to read the sandwich in light of itself. Now listen to how this story is, because this whole passage is again, a Markan sandwich. You've got Jesus cursing the fig tree, you've got Jesus cursing the temple, and then you've got Jesus cursing the fig tree. So let me walk you through this story, and then I'm going to give us some practical applications at the end. But let's just walk through this story. So if you've got your Bibles open, it's in Mark chapter 11. The beginning of Mark chapter 11 is Jesus coming into Jerusalem. So remember, so far to this point, Jesus hasn't been in Jerusalem. He's been hanging out in Galilee, in his hometown. I said it's a pretty rural place in Galilee. It's kind of similar to this as compared to Dallas, Houston, I guess Waco. Waco's as someone from Chicago, Waco's not that much of a city, but it's a city enough. So he's been in the rural parts of Galilee, and now Jesus is finally entering into Jerusalem. Last week he met that blind beggar Bartimaeus as he was coming in, and finally, triumphant entry, he comes into Jerusalem. And then it's kind of a strange scene. In verse 11 of Mark 11, he enters into Jerusalem and he goes into the temple courts. And then it says, in my version, he looked around at everything, but since it was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12. It's like, in Mark, Jesus goes into the temple, he's looking around at everything, he's like, y'all, it's kind of getting late, it's past my bedtime, let's go to sleep. And then he leaves. That's just how it goes. I mean, maybe Jesus' sleep schedule is like a, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Seems pretty right. So what happens is he leaves, and then the next day he's coming back to the temple courts. And here's where the story begins. So Jesus is feeling hungry, and he sees a fig tree in the distance. Now think in ancient Israel, a fig tree is very common. In fact, figs is the most common fruit. So what's the most common fruit here? What, like an apple or something? It's something akin to like, the Israeli version of an apple tree. It's a very common thing. But he's going there and he doesn't see any figs. Now, lest you think this is the fig tree's fault because the fig tree was just all messed up. It wasn't. Mark makes sure to specify that it was not the season for figs. Verse 13, when he reached it, he found nothing but leaves because it was not the season for figs. We know that this is happening sometime around March, April, because this is when Passover is. So it's like a little bit early, I guess, for figs, and so that's why he didn't see any figs on the tree. And then he curses the fig tree. May no one ever eat fruit from you again. And the disciples hear it. Okay, we're all like, strange, what's Jesus doing? Does Jesus just hate the environment? Like, what's going on? He reaches Jerusalem, and here's where the story that most of us are familiar with, the cursing, the driving out of the people who are selling stuff in the temple courts. Now, when I was younger, I used to think that this story was about, there are people in the temple courts, and they're like selling stuff, they're making a profit. And Jesus is mad, like, why are you making a profit in God's house? And when I was younger, I was like, my church kind of does this, because we do have like bookstore, because I used to go to a mega church when I was in Chicago, and like we do have a bookstore, and they are like technically making profit. Now, that bookstore is a little bit okay because they don't give any of the profit to the writer, they just like try donating it back to charity, but it is like they're still taking money from people in church. Like, is that what this passage is talking about? We're like, we're good, we don't sell it. To my knowledge, we don't sell anything in this church, so that means this passage doesn't apply to us. Notice what Jesus' words are. So when he overturns all the tables of the money changers and the people who are selling doves, then he teaches them, and listen to this verse in verse 17. He says, "Is it not written, my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you have made it a den of robbers." Now think about the imagery. He's not saying you're doing robbery stuff here. It's actually a den of robbers. And what do you do in a robber's den? Do you go and rob people? That's a hideout for people who are robbers themselves. Like, think about the Wild West. Like, they're going and committing crimes, and then they're hiding in their little like mountain passes where it's really hard for law enforcement to get there because they could shoot any law enforcement who's coming in their way. So it's a place for thieves to hide. So interestingly enough, Jesus is not saying, oh, you're not supposed to sell stuff, although that's certainly part of it. He's actually saying that this is a place where these bad people are hiding during the week. Like, they're doing all their bad stuff during the week, and then on the Sabbath, they come here and they hide, doing all this, after they've been doing all this bad stuff. Afterwards, the chief priests are obviously upset because they realize this is directed to them. Jesus leaves, and the disciple Peter points out, look, the fig tree you cursed has withered. So now, think about it. What does the fig tree represent? What's the relation between the fig tree and the temple? Seems like, in some sense, Mark is wanting us to see that the temple is like the fig tree. It was not bearing fruit. And just like when the fig tree didn't bear fruit, Jesus cursed it. When the temple was not bearing fruit, Jesus also cursed it. He cleansed it. But you say, that seems a little bit unfair because it wasn't the fig tree season. Like, what's Jesus got against a fig tree it's not its time? You might say the same thing for the temple. Actually, I think Mark intentionally said that this was not the season for figs. Because think about what Jesus' advent does. Do we meet in temples? We don't meet in temples. Do we offer sacrifices to God? We don't offer sacrifices. Is the only place you can pray to God in a temple? No, you can pray to God wherever. The advent of Jesus has eliminated the need for the temple. Was there a proper season for the temple? Yes, the Old Testament. You offered your sacrifices in the temple. You went to talk to priests in the temple. But now, that season is over. It's no longer the season for the temple. And Jesus is saying, now you can pray wherever you are. In fact, right after Peter says, the fig tree you cursed has withered, Jesus starts talking about prayer. He's like, Wherever you ask for things, whatever you ask for in prayer, it will be done for you. You don't have to go and ask the priest to pray for you. You don't have to go into, as he's going to die and the curtain of the temple will be torn in two, you have direct access to God. So I've told you that, and I hope you're seeing this too, the fig tree story is not just because God hates fig trees. It's because he's showing a juxtaposition of saying, when the fig tree was not in season, it was gotten rid of. When it was not bearing fruit, it was gotten rid of. When the temple is also failing to bear fruit, the temple will be gotten rid of as well. Now, Jesus cites two different passages here in his little teaching section, which is in verse 17. He cites something from Isaiah 56, which is my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations. He also cites something from Jeremiah 7, but you have made it a den of robbers. And I want to identify these two passages as the two main things that Jesus is telling us today. So let's start with Jeremiah 7. So I would encourage you actually to crack open your Bibles. Maybe Jeremiah is not readily accessible to you. So if you're trying to look for Jeremiah, it's after Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, Isaiah, Jeremiah. And if you've hit Lamentations or Ezekiel, you are too far. So Jeremiah chapter 7. The first problem that Jesus identifies from the temple is that there are people who are going about their daily lives, doing bad stuff, and then coming to the temple and thinking everything's okay. So, Jeremiah chapter 7. We can start at verse 3. This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. Reform your ways and your actions, and I will let you live in this place. Do not trust in deceptive words and say, this is the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord. If you really change your ways and your actions and deal with each other justly, if you do not oppress the foreigner, the fatherless, or the widow, and do not shed innocent blood in this place, and if you do not follow other gods to your own harm, then I will let you live in this place, in the land I gave your ancestors forever and ever. Now skip to verse 9. Will you steal and murder, commit adultery and perjury, burn incense to Baal and follow other gods you have not known, and then come and stand before me in this house which bears my name and say, we are safe to do all these detestable things? Has this house which bears my name become a den of robbers to you? But I have been watching, declares the Lord. That passage is telling us that it's not that Jesus just was mad about the money people, like people selling stuff. That's not what he was mad about. In Jeremiah 7, you're doing stealing, murder, adultery, lying, burning incense to other gods, and then you're going to come in and be like, oh, we're safe in the temple. That's Jesus' first problem with the temple. The second problem is that they weren't attracting foreigners, which is a strange thing to say. Because you might be thinking, like, Israel, God chose Israel, God didn't choose other nations. Like, why are they supposed to be attracting other nations? Let me nerd out for a second. It will be fairly brief. So, in the Old Testament, we know that God chooses Abraham, which is like the Jewish people. But he never chose Abraham to just be Abraham. The first thing that God says to Abraham is, through you, all the nations will be blessed. So like, even though God did specifically choose Israel, he didn't mean for it to be like Israel and Israel alone to the end of time. It was supposed to be that Israel was supposed to go out and bring other nations in. Like, in some sense, it was supposed to be evangelistic, which I know is not a word that was used in those times, but it was supposed to be evangelistic. And in fact, what people anticipated when they said the Messiah will come, and when the Messiah comes, the sign will be that lots of nations are coming to us, to the temple. So let's turn to our next passage. Go back to Isaiah 56. So it's the book right before Jeremiah. Isaiah 56. So the beginning of Isaiah 56 is, so he says, maintain justice and do what is right. Blessed is the person who does this, the person who holds it fast. Verse 3, let no foreigner who is bound to the Lord say, the Lord will exclude me from his people. Let no eunuch complain, I am only a dry tree. Verse 4, this is what the Lord says, to the eunuchs who keep my Sabbath, who choose what pleases me and hold fast to my covenant, to them I will give my temple and its walls a memorial and a name better than sons and daughters. I will give them an everlasting name that will endure forever. Which, by the way, is like, so eunuchs are people who are castrated so that they don't have any temptations with the court that they're serving in. And this word from the Lord is beautiful. He's like, Because in ancient Israel, your progeny is a huge part. Like if you have no kids, that's really bad for you. And God is saying to these eunuchs, he's like, to the people who have no sons and daughters, I say to you, I will give you an everlasting name, better than sons and daughters. Okay, let's keep going. Verse 6. Foreigners who bind themselves to the Lord, to minister to him, to love the name of the Lord, all who keep the Sabbath without desecrating it. Verse 7. These I will bring to my holy mountain and give them joy in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and sacrifices will be accepted on my altar, for my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations. That's the part that Jesus quotes. In other words, Jesus is anticipating, as all of those in Israel were anticipating, that when the Messiah comes, there's going to be nations that are flocking to him. So when Jesus goes into the temple, he's expecting this. And he doesn't see it. It's just the Israelites being like insular. They're just worshiping God themselves. So the two things that he's condemning them for is, one, they're like doing all these sins, doing all these evil things, and then coming into the Lord's house and being like, oh, I'm safe. And then the second thing is, they aren't open to foreigners. They're like, we're just kind of our own people. We're our own little people group. And before I make this really practical, I want us to take a second and just do some breathing exercises with me. Breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. Again, breathe in, breathe out. It's a peaceful place to be in God's house. It's lovely. I mean, after a long, hard week where you're dealing with a lot of people who are like super annoying, doing a lot of work, you can come here and you can just be yourself. You can just be present with people who love you and care for other people. In Jerusalem, we know that they also treated the temple similarly. There's also a place of glory and grandeur. In fact, the disciples in Mark chapter 13 are going to be like, the temple is beautiful. I mean, look at these stones, look at these pillars. It's just lovely. And when they came in, they probably thought, wow, this is a really lovely time for us to relax. And you know what God said about it? Jesus says, this is a den of robbers. And if Jesus said that to them, that word still, in some sense, can apply to us today as a warning. Is this a den of robbers here? And if that makes you uncomfortable, I mean, it should, because it made them uncomfortable. It made them so uncomfortable that they wanted to kill him. But it means something. It's a word from the Lord to us about how do we treat the Lord's house. The first thing is about the den of robbers thing. In the modern day, it would be something like, if you are, engaged in, let's say that you are a kind of person who's, doing bad things. Let's say you're committing crimes, and then you come to the Lord's house, and you're like, oh, nobody knows. God doesn't know. Nobody sees. I mean, most of you probably, hopefully all of you are not committing crimes, but maybe it's a little bit, maybe more mild than committing crimes. Maybe it's like you live a life outside in which you're drinking excessively, and then you come in here and you live a different, and you like pretend that nothing's going on. Or you live a life outside that's like engaged in watching a lot of pornography, and then you come in here and you have a different life. Or maybe you like swear a lot when you're around other people, like you have a really foul mouth, but then you're here and you're like, oh, it's a different thing here. God, Jesus, is saying, that's what the den of robbers is. You're doing all this bad stuff, and then you come here as your little hideout from doing all that bad stuff. Now hear me very, 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 very clearly. I am not saying that like you can't do any sins and then like come in here. Guys, I mean, the church is supposed to be a sick house. It's supposed to be a hospital. It's for people who sin. If you think that you didn't sin this week, you probably just didn't realize it, but you did, because everybody sins. I mean, like, I committed sins this week. So I'm not saying, Jesus' admonition is you're not allowed to sin and then come into God's house. What Jesus is condemning here is self-righteousness. Yeah. The kind of thing where you're like, you're doing all this bad stuff, and you're like, oh, God's not going to catch me. Nobody knows. I'm totally fine here. If you're committing sins during the week, you're just like everybody else here, because we are all sinners, including myself. But if you're committing these sins and you're like not repenting of them, and you're like, nah, that's just, I can have my own life at church and my double life out there. That's what Jesus is condemning, is the double life. I read a study that was produced in 2023, so just last year, from Barna, who runs a lot of Christian studies. And they said the number one reason why people leave church, I've mentioned that a lot of young people leave church. Like, people when they get to be about Nick's age or Brianna's age, like, a lot of people are leaving church at that age. And they did a poll. What is the reason why people leave church? Number one reason is not because there's so much pain in the world, and how do I explain it? It's not because they're bored of church, which is maybe surprising. It's the number one reason is because of hypocrisy in the church. And who among us has not experienced some amount of hypocrisy in the church? Like, I was umpiring, I used to umpire baseball in the summer, and you have coaches yelling at you when you make the bad calls, that kind of thing. And I'm in this league where basically everybody just is a churchgoer because they don't have any practices on Sunday. Like, you even see some people that you know from church at these fields. And like, I remember at one point there was a coach who got mad because I called his player out and he thought the player was safe. And he's like, what's wrong with you? Like, yelling at me. And I thought to myself, like, oh, this guy probably goes to church. He probably went to church like 2 hours ago. And now, he's out here just yelling at me. But before I think about the hypocrisy of other people, I gotta think about the hypocrisy of myself. Because it's not like I can't control that guy's hypocrisy. In terms of like our witness to the outside world, I can't control what other people are doing. I can only control what myself is doing. Yes. And how many of us might be caught, in modern language, caught lacking when people are like, oh, that person's a Christian, but that guy's not acting like a Christian. Maybe it's like, your interactions with a cashier or a waiter are something that you probably wouldn't be proud for all of your church people to see. Or your interactions with a friend who's not a Christian, who's like kind of leading you astray. Not an interaction you'd be proud of church people to see. Again, I don't say this to say like, you're not allowed to sin. I mean, you shouldn't sin, but I don't mean that to say like, there's no such thing as Christian sin. What I want to say is, it's the whole double life concept. It's, are you living a life outside and you're pretending that none of that happens when you come to church, a self-righteous sort of life. So that's the first one, don't live a double life. Number 2, we need to find ways to ask God to clear out areas of our life that are thieves' hideouts. So remember that imagery of like in the Wild West, you've got gangs who are involved in all of these crimes, and then they run back to their mountain passes. And if you've like watched any kind of either Wild West movie or, even, I know that somebody said last week that they don't really watch Star Wars that much, but like when you've got Obi-Wan Kenobi who's hiding in the desert, there are like these mountain passes, and the person who's walking in, they're really scared because they could easily get ambushed. And the people who are there, they're feeling good because they could just shoot anybody who comes in. What areas of our lives might be like a thief's hideout, where we're like, nobody's going to touch that, God's not going to touch that. We might like to think, oh, we don't got any areas, like I know about all of my sins, but there may be areas in which we're like, we've given up on that. Like I remember a friend who, he's, most young guys kind of make a lot of sex jokes, that kind of thing. And he actually cares a lot about his purity. He's a Christian guy, but I remember we were doing a Bible study and he was like, I don't really think, and we were talking about if you should be able to make crude jokes, like sex jokes. And he's like, well, I don't know, I don't really feel convicted about it. I mean, like, I don't do the bad stuff, so my joke's bad, it's not such a big deal. And I'm not gonna say anything to him, I'm just gonna say for my own self, that's an area of my life that I wanna make sure everything is under the subjection of Jesus. Like, there isn't an area in my life in which I'm hiding it from Jesus, where I'm like, yeah, Jesus is not gonna touch that. It's a little bit too ingrained. I know that I'm that kind of person who worries, so I'm just going to give up trying to work on it. That's what a thief's hideout is. That's what Jesus needs to come clear. Number 3, invite others into the faith. So in Israel's day, their problem was that they didn't have foreigners that were coming into the temple. In our day, like, we invite everybody. Like, we're not going to prevent anybody from coming out to the street and coming into this church. But it is a struggle for everybody. And I know this from personal experience. Like, how do you share the gospel? Like, it feels awkward to evangelize to people. Sometimes I feel like I'm not equipped, or like I don't want to be pushy, I don't want to be mean. Here's my first word of encouragement. So salespeople, if you've ever done any sales, you know that if you're trying to pitch, let's say that you're selling, do you guys know what Berkeys are? The water filter thing? So I'll pitch to you, I'll be a salesperson. So there are lots of things in your water that may not be safe for you to drink, including fluoride and things that have been scientifically proven to lower your health, and including lowering your IQ. So if you buy a Berkey water filter, it's for a nice price of like $100. You put some water in it, and it will filter out everything. In fact, it can even filter out food coloring. That's how good this water filter is. And you will up your children's IQ if you buy this Berkey water filter. Now, I don't know how I knew so much about the Berkey, but my parents have a Berkey, so that's how it goes. A salesperson knows that not every person, every household actually needs what they're selling. Because like, maybe you have a Brita, like maybe you have a filter, or maybe you just can't afford it. Like it's not good financial investment for you to buy what they're selling you. But can I tell you something about Jesus? Everyone needs Jesus. You ain't a salesperson where you're like, yeah, I'm pitching you something, yeah, you probably don't need it, but like, I'm just gonna try to pitch it to you. Everyone needs Jesus. It doesn't matter whether you're feeling good, whether you're like a celebrity, or whether you're like down and out. Everyone needs Jesus, because Jesus is good for everybody. So that's the first thing that I will say as a word of encouragement. But the second thing that I'll say is, evangelism does not need to be like, you walk up to somebody and you're like, have you heard about our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ? Evangelism is as simple as loving people.
Yes.
But it means that you have to intentionally love people. So I've heard two things on the spectrum of evangelism, because I've been in the church for a long time. On the one hand, some people will say, evangelism is you got to go up to people and you got to tell them, like, do you know where you're going if you were to die today? And on the other hand, people are like, just live your life good. Just like people will be attracted to you if you like live your life good. I think for some of you, both things, like this one is really hard to go up to somebody and say, you're going to hell. This one is like, it feels a little bit weak. Like if all I have to do is live good. The middle path is you love people intentionally out of your way.
Yes.
So it's not like you're just like, oh, I'm living a nice life and people are going to ask me naturally. Like you go out of your way to like talk to somebody who needs to be talked to. And maybe somebody's like having a hard week. You ask them to get lunch. Maybe somebody, there's a family that you invite them over for dinner. Maybe there's somebody who like needs a meal brought to them. Like all of this kind of stuff is somewhere. It's not just, I'm going to passively live my life. And I think that evangelism is good, but it can be hard in certain circumstances and sometimes detrimental. A nice middle ground, find a way to love people intentionally.
Yes.
Don't just sit there and wait for people to come to you. Go out to love them. Invite people to your house. Ask them how they're doing. And that can just be like, some people just need to be listened to.
Yes.
Like some people are struggling with something and they just need a listening ear.
Yes.
And I know, as many of you know, that sometimes it's hard to just like listen to people who are just like going to be talking your ear off about all their problems for a long time. That's service, my friends. If you think service is always going to be fun, you ain't got service right. Sometimes people are going to talk your ear off, and instead of you being like, man, this person just, like they have a degree in yapology, as the kids say nowadays. Like they just know how to yap and just like talk and talk and talk. And like, I'm done with them. Like service is about doing stuff that is hard.
Yes.
So maybe it's like you listen to somebody, even if they're talking for a long time, and you just love them.
Yes.
That's what it is to be a Christian. When Jesus condemns the Jewish people, the Jewish temple, and he says the temple is not in season, it's not bearing fruit. He said there are two reasons for it not bearing fruit. One, it wasn't bearing fruit because people were doing bad things and then pretending like everything was good. And two, it wasn't drawing foreigners in. We're not living in the temple age now, but those applications still apply to us. So I want to encourage you, what of those two things might be applying to you today? Is there a way in which you need to reach out to somebody and love them? Not just sit at your home and like be a nice Christian. Like go out and love them and bring them in. And maybe that God will open that door for conversation for you to insert the gospel in. But maybe it's just as much as loving them, and eventually over time, that'll be clear to them. At this time, I would invite Rosie to come and play for us. If you have any prayer requests, you should feel free to bring them up here, and I would be glad to pray for you. But if you have nothing specific, I would encourage you to spend this time in prayer, asking the Lord, what are some places in your life that might be a thief's hideout? What are some places in your life where you're like, nah, God's not going to touch that. I'll hang on to that. Or what are some ways that you can invite other people into your home to love them this week? Let's pray.